Hi, my name is Joe Makuc with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society here at Glen Foerd in the Mansion House. And today, for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society led Cultivating Community Gardens Memories Project, also known as the Community Garden Memory Project, I'm here with Dan Coonan, who is a 3-year
5 years.
5 years.
5 years. I'm one of the founding members.
A
Of the garden.
5-year founding member of the Glen Foerd Community Garden. So today we're going to be talking about that and about Dan's experience, DHS, with the community garden, and with gardening in general and planting trees as a community gardener. But before we get into all of that, Dan, I want to ask you the questions about your background, if that's okay.
Okay.
So where did you grow up? And did you or your neighbors have gardens there?
Okay, Joe, I grew up in the Mayfair section of Northeast Philadelphia, which is only a few miles downriver from here, so to speak. So growing up there, it was a community of row houses, and most people didn't have a very big backyard. We had like a 3x15 strip of soil in the backyard, and my memory is that my mom planted some tomatoes, grew some tomatoes there, and also planted mint leek, spearmint, which I remember just absolutely taking over the garden. So I wasn't involved in any of that, but I did get involved with my grandfather, who came from a farming family. He came from Maryland, and he was participating in a community garden down farther on Frankford Avenue. So he would take me down there to help him water, and I was very young at the time, and I learned some things. For example, peanuts grow underground, potatoes grow underground. Who knew? So those were my very early gardening experiences. Other than that, my wife grew most of the flowers in our house in Mayfair and now our house at Torresdale.
So your part, like where you lived in Mayfair, you only really had the tomatoes and mint, but your grandfather, also in Mayfair, who had come from Maryland.
Right.
Yeah. Do you remember the name? You said down Frankford Avenue.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. It was down across from a cemetery, or adjacent to a cemetery, down near the Frankfurt Transportation Terminal. And the name of it escapes me now. I could probably look it up and tell you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story, honestly. Yeah. It's always nice to get another story of a different community garden, and especially one, with such history, because a lot of the gardens that we're talking about these days, obviously, are ones that have come more recently. But so you lived in Mayfair for a while, and eventually you came here to Torresdale. How did you come to Glen Foerd Community Garden in particular? I guess as a founding member, how did you get involved in the founding?
Well, I moved to Torresdale about 15 years ago, and I wanted to get, immerse myself in what was going on in the neighborhood. And one of the great finds in moving to the Torresdale neighborhood was the Glen Foerd property and mansion. So I was fascinated by the history and what you could take advantage of here, the park setting along the river. And I kind of got involved with events, became a member of Glen Foerd, and did some gardening at home, where we live over in Torresdale. But then about 5 years ago, in one of the newsletters, it was announced that there would be a community garden forming here, and plots were being offered, 20 plots. So I leapt at the opportunity and subscribed to one of the plots, and I've been growing ever since.
Yeah, wow. So you started off like just growing up, just watering plants, learning what potatoes and peanuts are. You grew some things by yourself, and your wife did the flowers for the most part.
Yeah.
And now in like around 2017, 2018.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2017. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was the inaugural year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to come here. And I'm happy to ask about your current plot because I just saw it, and I have to say I really like it. I'm not gonna.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I
It's
want
a little bit of a wild thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe we should just talk about it right now.
Yeah.
So you, I believe, Lisa told me you're the one with the butternut squash and the
Yes.
tomatoes,
Yes.
and and then you have some marigolds in the corner.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me about those plants.
Okay, so I have the tomatoes, which are my favorite fruit or vegetable, depending on how you classify it. And I have 2 plants there this year, and I also have 2 tomatillo plants.
I was wondering about those as well.
Yeah, well, the tomatoes are doing very well. The tomatillos were going gangbusters, and then for some strange reason, instead of ripening to maturity, a nice green thing inside the little lantern that they grow, they started to turn yellow. The husk dried out. They fell to the ground. So every year is different in the garden. Some years are better than others, and sometimes we experiment, and most of the experiments are successful. And I was very happy with the tomatillos. I bought them at the recommendation of Pam Henshaw, who's also a garden participant.
Yes.
And I was very happy with them. We both had an infestation of potato beetles, so we dealt with that because they were chewing up the leaves, and then they seemed to dissipate. And after that, as I said, many tomatillos, but not many green ones.
Yes.
So a little frustrated by that, but oh well. I'll have to try to find out what happened. I'm not sure what happened. They said overwatering could be a problem, or it could be too much nitrogen or not enough nitrogen. So I really haven't sourced that out. But the tomatoes are doing great. I have 3 different kinds of peppers. I have some Aleppo peppers, some jalapenos, and some poblanos. And the marigolds that you pointed out early on, I learned that that some insects don't like them, so it repels them. So I try to plant them in the corners. And last year, I inadvertently planted about 40 squash plants. I'll tell you how that happened. I do home composting. I have a barrel composter with kitchen scraps and shredded leaves in there. So I do my own compost. And I think I inadvertently put a squash in there one time, and there were a lot of seeds in it. So the next year when I planted, all these squash plants came up, butternut squash. So I let most of them go, and I had quite a number of pretty large squash. So this year I did it on purpose.
Yes.
So you might see that the plot is rimmed by butternut squash plants, and there are some fruits growing in there. So they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And I really love butternut squash because their storage duration is very long. In fact, I had about 20 of them last year, not just from this plot, but also from home. And I still have 3 of them, and they look like I can still eat them. They've been sitting around for almost a year. So they're very tough. The animals sometimes try to go after them with our friendly neighborhood groundhog, and they might try to take a bite out of them, and they're so hard that they have no use for them.
Yeah.
So they're very resistant to the predators that we get in the garden, but they also need to be tamed because they grow very fast and they can strangle other plants. So you have to keep an eye on them.
Yes.
I also had some basil out there, and I try to take advantage of the seasons as well. What I don't have out there now are the lettuces and the arugula and the mesclun and the radishes and the carrots that I started in the spring. When I first started growing, I would plant from plants, and then I learned how to plant from seeds, start them in the spring. Different plants are good for different seasons. The lettuces and the mesclun and the arugula are springtime plants, and I had quite bountiful crops from that. But then when the tomatoes kick in and the squash, they kind of take things over.
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing that I saw, I was just wandering along the edge of the garden, and I saw these huge squashes, and I was like, someone's doing well. But yeah, cool. So I want to segue from that. So that's where you are, 5 years down the line in this garden. What is your role in the community garden as a member?
I'm just really one of the gardeners, and I try to exchange thoughts with other gardeners. You would think that people, if you come over here in the morning, you would see tons of people. You don't always. Sometimes you're by yourself, which is nothing's wrong with that. Sometimes it gives you time to kind of think and just kind of commune with nature. But other times I encounter other gardeners, and we trade stories. We compare each other's gardens. So just like to feel that I'm a participating gardener, and if we see something going wrong out there, we inform Sarah, who's in charge of the garden, and she helps, takes care of it. And I think Mike, who's works on the grounds here.
Yes.
And he's a good man, and together we get it done. So I don't really have any kind of a leadership role.
Yeah. Okay. And so I think you've talked about this a little bit too, with transitioning from the cold weather crops that you have, your lettuces, your arugulas, etc., into your summer crops now. How would you characterize your yearly routine in the garden?
Basically, it starts at home where I plant seeds, and I put them on a heat mat, and put a little tent over them to encourage them to germinate and start to grow, and do that back about 4 weeks before the last frost. And my wife's always telling me, don't put anything in the ground until Mother's Day, specifically the tomato plants and other things. But I learned that I can put in some of these earlier spring crops a little bit earlier than that, so they get a jump start. So we do those things, harvest that, and then in the meantime, the tomatoes are germinating in their pots. And I usually have a lot of them from the previous season, and also radishes and things like that. I lost my train of thought when the phone rang. Sorry.
Oh, good. But so then in the fall, we've talked a bit about what you're growing right now in the summer. What do you do in the fall?
The fall, the season actually extends until kind of mid-October. I'm still getting tomatoes, and till the end of October, I'm still watching the squashes mature. I've tried in the past to plant additional lettuce when it starts getting cooler, and I went down to a neighborhood community growing project called Greens Grow. You may have heard of it.
Yes, I know.
And I know they're having trouble right now. Hopefully they can recover from that. But I got some of their lettuce plants and 3 or 4 different varieties. And last fall I put those in. So I'd like to repeat that this year and take advantage of the cooler weather to grow additional lettuce and radishes, which grow very well.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of the cycle.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me what the garden looks like when you first plant everything. Everything's down close to the ground, and you saw it today. It's it's up there.
Yeah.
And I don't have the tallest garden out there. The guy who has the corn out there is it's like 12 feet high.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Crazy. But I mean, it's not always about the height.
I know.
Yeah. The squashes are never going to go that tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the.
I'm not going for height.
Yeah.
I'm going for fruit size.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so, and meanwhile, as you're doing all this, you're also composting at home.
Yes.
And I know that now there's a compost at the garden as well.
Yes, taking advantage of that as well.
Yeah.
It used to be that we would throw our plants that were no longer productive, what have you, into a pile. near the garden, but this year Glen Foerd put in a compost bin, which I think is good. You know, we're going to be able to recycle those plants and get them back into the soil and help grow next year's crops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you say the garden has changed since you first came here? Speaking of the compost, but other innovations as well.
I would say that Glen Foerd has innovated by last year changing the soil out. I think that the soil that was initially used probably was played out in terms of the nutrients. So they replaced the soil, and we had a really good year last year with growth of tomatoes especially.
Wow.
And the hoses, they have hoses at both ends of the garden, and they replace the hoses with those ones that don't kink, and they expand when they're filled with water.
Yes.
And having a good hose out there is very important.
Yes.
And with so many people using them, they spring leaks now and again. But Glen Foerd's done a good job of keeping that up so that we can water our plants.
Yes.
And this year, someone suggested that the groundhogs can be kept out by putting up some black, like a black cloth or black
Yes.
plastic around the bottom of the garden, and you probably saw that. Because
Yeah.
I'm told the groundhogs, if they can't see it, they're not going to go in there. You know, otherwise they can find their way in. They can climb and
Yes.
they can dig under the fence.
Yeah.
But the other way that the garden has changed is that people come and people go. One of my friends gardened with me for the first couple of years, and she got tired of it and was doing stuff at home. But then I have a new neighbor, you know. So you get to meet different people, and the socialization factor is a good element of belonging to the garden.
Yeah, I mean, along that story, along that line, I was wondering if you have any favorite stories from the community garden.
Just I guess I would talk about the animals that come visit. Often you're going to catch a squirrel in there. Once I went into one of my tomato plants and I didn't know, but there was a squirrel in there, and he panicked, scared the heck out of me, and ran out of there. So we get visits from the squirrels. You'll see running off with tomatoes. I don't mind sharing as long as they leave me some. Groundhogs come in, help themselves, and I've learned a lot about different kinds of insects that I was unfamiliar with before. Some of the spiders that have turned up. So my story on that would be just the wildlife that we see. We see deer in Glen Foerd sometimes. Once in a while you'll see a fox. So it's a good way to kind of get out there in nature and see some of the flora as well as the fauna. It
Yeah.
might be backwards, but you know what I mean.
Either way, it's the same
Yeah.
words, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking it's very interesting that you have this wealth of experience gardening on your own at your own home, and helping your grandfather watering in a very urban community garden, and now you're here. You've been here in this setting for 5 years at a place that's very unlike a lot of community gardens in Philadelphia, like surrounded mostly by trees. And home to so many pockets of wildlife like foxes and deer and groundhogs. So it's a very cool contrast.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was wondering how it stacks up compared to gardening at home for you.
I do have a garden at home. It's actually similar to what I have here at Glen Foerd. They're raised beds, and the experience is usually pretty similar, but we were talking earlier about having backups for when you're doing recordings or photos. Well, I have backups for my plants. I have kind of duplicate pepper plants at home as to what I have here, so I'm thinking if I have a crop failure over here, maybe I'll do okay at home.
Yeah.
So I have, kind of a copy, and I live in a block of twin and single homes, so it's not quite as tight as it was in Mayfair. But I'm able to get out there in the backyard, and we have a lot of birds, and you know,
Yeah.
and I can share my crops with my neighbors.
Yeah.
Can't eat it all.
No, you never can. Especially.
These are for you.
Oh, thank you kindly. So you've just given me what appear to be some lovely orange, yellow colored tomatoes.
Tomatoes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. What variety?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I have to look it up before I left the house.
Well, they look like beefsteak, like in shape.
Yeah, it's like yeah, that's the shape of them. Yeah. I grew them from seed actually, and I lost track of what the variety was. But for some reason, I'm a lot better at growing orange tomatoes than I am at growing red tomatoes.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, red cherry tomatoes being the exception. You may see a lot of red cherry tomatoes over there in the garden. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you like them.
Yeah, I don't know. I grew up with a garden that my father largely tended, and we never had, orange tomatoes.
Yeah.
So this is like, it's always amazing to see them, and I do maybe I wouldn't tell him to this his face, but I think that they might taste better to me. But although I mean his tastes very good. I think that anything that you garden, or have a tendon.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're fresh, Joe. They just came just picked today.
Wow. Well, yeah, I'm very grateful. I feel like I would love someday to make a cookbook of all the things from all the vegetables and fruits that people have given me from their gardens. But hurts this job. But
yeah, we actually did that one year. We had an end of season event where we did a potluck supper in the house that's next to the garden over there where Pam lives now. The previous resident was the previous director of Glen Foerd. She got us together. We did a potluck, and we all brought copies of our recipes.
So was that Meg Sharp?
That was Meg Sharp, yeah.
Yes. Wow. Okay. That's
Yeah,
very
so
cool.
it'd be great to do that again. Maybe Pam will have us into her house. Off the top, suggest that to her.
Right, because Pam lives on the property, right?
Yeah, she lives in the house where Meg Sharp will.
Yes. Yeah. So right very close to the garden.
Right next to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Pam, of course, being the person who also has been working with you on the Tomatillo project.
Yes.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing so much about kind of the past and the present of the garden with me. And what I'm wondering now is, what are your future plans for your garden and for your participation with Glen Foerd?
Just to keep on experimenting and trying different things. Maybe I'll try those tomatillos again next year. But I like variety. I've kind of gotten to the point where I know I can do tomatoes and they're going to be successful. I know I can do peppers and they're successful. I know I can do butternut squash and they're good, and some of the spring lettuces. But I had things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. The groundhogs like them way too much, so I found this garden is not the place to plant those because they're just going to get eaten. For some reason, they don't eat the lettuces that I plant, which I'm surprised at. So it's experimentation. So I would just like to continue to experiment and try different things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me, Dan. I think the note of experimentation is a really great way to end on. But yeah, I really appreciate everything you shared with me, and I'm looking forward to being able to share it with listeners, across platforms, to help people learn more about your experience at Glen Foerd. And I'm going to turn off the recording now.